Long regarded as a complete buffoon, an annoying drag on the prequel trilogy, and a fourth wall breaking gimmick designed to sell toys to kids, Jar Jar Binks is easily the most universally despised character in the history of the Star Wars franchise. That's saying something given the reactions the Ewoks got when Return of the Jedi came out. However, one fan theory says that there's much more to Jar Jar than we would be led to believe based on his conduct alone. In fact, this theory states that he may not only be one of the most evil and powerful beings in the galaxy, but possibly even Emperor Palpatine's secret co-conspirator in his quest to rule the galaxy. Now, I know this seems like a big pill to swallow, so let's take a look at the evidence. We'll start by establishing that Jar Jar's apparently endless luck that helped him survive multiple life-threatening situations was actually the hallmark of a highly skilled warrior. It's obviously not a given that being a powerful fighter in and of itself indicates a link to the Force, but there are very few characters without use of the Force who are able to pull off some of the feats that Jar Jar did. So let's start right from the beginning, when Jar Jar was leading Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan to the underwater Gungan village, and casually leapt about 15 feet into the air before doing a twisting somersault dive into the lake. You might interpret this as something that the Gungans are just naturally able to do as easily as they walk, except for the fact that no other Gungan ever displays this ability, and the only other people who do are either Jedi or Sith. Jar Jar also appears both comically cowardly and completely lost when thrust into the middle of battle, but always manages to cause amazingly effective damage to his adversaries, and always appears to do so completely accidentally. Just during the Battle of Naboo, he accidentally dumps a bunch of Boombas onto the advancing droid army, accidentally crashes an enemy tank by hanging onto the cannon with all of his body weight, and accidentally shoots multiple droids with a blaster that's tangled around his ankle while trying to shake it off. At first glance, this all appears to be a stupid slapstick comedy designed to entertain the kids, performed by a bumbling idiot who should have been killed a dozen times over. He ruins our suspension of disbelief because nobody is really that lucky, but remember how Obi-Wan never believed in luck because everything is the will of the Force. So, if we look at Jar Jar's actions in that light, then we start to see the picture of someone who may be attuned enough to the Force to be able to do all of these things intentionally, yet still make it look like an accident. In fact, his movements are reminiscent of the drunken fist style of Kung Fu, which is designed to appear uncoordinated and unsteady while using a combination of body weight, momentum, and unpredictability to confuse opponents. So while all of this isn't necessarily evidence that Jar Jar is a Force user, it does suggest that he's more than he makes himself out to be, and that should make us suspicious in and of itself. Why would he choose to project the idiotic persona he does if the being underneath is so much more complex and capable? Why would he want to hide that from everyone? So let's steer away from combat and look at another hallmark of Force users: mind control. Simply enough, someone as clearly inept and naive as Jar Jar should not be able to exert the kind of influence that he does on practically everyone that he comes into contact with. Yet we see one instance after another of some of the most responsible, heroic people foregoing rational thought by putting their faith in him. So let's just look at Jar Jar's track record in this regard. He convinces two experienced Jedi to take him along on a serious mission all of 2 minutes after meeting them. He goes from social outcast to general in the Gungan army, despite showing less than zero aptitude for military tactics and strategy. Padme inexplicably leaves him as her surrogate in the Senate without any hesitation, despite his known shortcomings, shall we say. And most of all, he convinces the entire Senate to completely abandon democracy by giving Chancellor Palpatine unlimited wartime powers. The level of irresponsibility these otherwise respected leaders show by putting Jar Jar in charge of anything at all is insane. So why does it keep happening? How could anyone not realize what would happen if this moron were to be given any kind of serious power? So, whenever anyone in the Star Wars universe displays uncharacteristically poor judgment, it's often because they've been manipulated by Force mind control techniques. The Jedi seem to use this power, commonly known as the Jedi mind trick, quite liberally to sneak past stormtroopers or other person-shaped obstacles, while dark side users like Darth Vader and Kylo Ren use it to sense the thoughts and emotions of their adversaries. If Jar Jar really is as skilled a Force user as this fan theory suggests, then the lapses in judgment that have allowed him to become so influential may have been the result of his own use of Force-based mind control. His use of these techniques is subtle, and we're not even thinking to look for them, but his behavior at these key moments is very reminiscent of the telltale signs both the Jedi and Sith exhibit. First is the obvious one, the hand gestures. Jedi and Sith are both known to wave their hands while invoking the Force, and we've seen Jar Jar do just that when it mattered most. He was waving his hand while being promoted to General, he waved his hand during his temporary promotion into the Senate, and he even did it while he was making the motion to grant Palpatine the emergency war powers he never laid down. There are other examples of Jar Jar's powers of persuasion littered throughout the prequel trilogy. He talked Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan into traveling through the core of Naboo so they would need to take him along. He got into a fight with Sebulba, causing Anakin to intervene and ultimately meet the Jedi. Then he mocked Qui-Gon behind his back to instill seeds of disrespect for the Jedi in Anakin before he was even accepted into the Order. He even told Anakin that Padme was pretty hot to encourage the obsession that Palpatine was able to exploit many years later. When you take all this into account, you'll probably come to the conclusion that Jar Jar is either fantastically talented at being unintentionally counterproductive, or he's putting on an elaborate ruse to trick the Jedi and their friends. If he is putting on an act, then we just need to follow the money to realize that every one of his quote-unquote stupid acts somehow benefits Palpatine. Coincidence? Now, you might think this is a ridiculous idea, since on the surface, Jar Jar and Palpatine appear to run in such different circles that there's no way they would have ever come into contact prior to the events of Episode 1, The Phantom Menace. That's what you're probably supposed to think, but don't forget, Palpatine and Jar Jar are both from Naboo, meaning they could have known each other for many years before everything went off the rails when the Trade Federation imposed their blockade. And if they weren't partners, and Jar Jar is just some lame brain that Palpatine suckered into handing him more power, why were they still seen together in Episode 3? If you were President of the United States, do you think anyone would take you seriously if you were seen hanging around with someone like Jar Jar? Why would you be willing to invite the embarrassment unless you were secretly in league with him? So if you still doubt the possibility that Jar Jar was much more malevolent than he was letting on, consider how George Lucas described Yoda as the kind of fairy tale creature who seems insignificant until you find out he's some kind of wise old wizard. So given how George wanted to make the overall narrative of the prequels mirror the originals in many fashions, then we're missing an insignificant creature who turns out to be much more significant than he appears to be at first glance. Unless that creature was Jar Jar all along. And if that's the case, then how come we never saw him reveal his true nature? We knew he wasn't going to appear in the original trilogy, so why wouldn't he have dropped his cover at some point so they could finish his story out before he was gone? Well, maybe it was because George Lucas was preparing for the long game and had no plans for his involvement to end with Episode 3. If the sequel trilogy were to happen at some point, then exposing Jar Jar in those movies would not only cast his involvement in the prequels in a completely new light, but it would also add a new wrinkle to the original trilogy, since we would now rewatch it with the knowledge that Jar Jar was still out there somewhere. So if Disney were to stick with this plan, it would be a genius way of retroactively improving the often maligned prequels by completely reinventing the character who embodied everything that was wrong with them. Thanks for watching this video, and as always, I'd love to hear your thoughts, so please leave them in the comments section below, as well as whether you buy into the Darth Jar Jar theory, or if you think we're reading a whole lot into a whole lot of nothing. If you'd like to support the Star Wars Wavelength YouTube channel, please click subscribe so you can receive notifications whenever new videos are posted, and come back and check them out whenever you have time. Thanks again for watching, and may the Force be with you, always.